Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I am speaking with Jodi Shaw. Jodi is a student support coordinator at Smith College. I became aware of Jodi because of a video she put out regarding statements that the university put out about racism, and this leads back to an incident that happened in 2018. Hey Jodi, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Obed.
So yeah, if you want to go through the how this all started and then just go from there.
Really, it started for me on July 31st, 2018, when a Black student accused a white staff member of racially motivated behavior. The college spent a lot of money and a lot of time doing a very thorough investigation through an independent counsel, which found no evidence of racial bias. And yet, from the very first day the accusation was leveled, the college went into overdrive to support a narrative that something horribly racist had happened on campus, and that we needed to have all kinds of initiatives, councils, committees, especially discussions and dialogue about race. And these dialogues and discussions are troubling because they're based on critical race theory, and they assume that racism is everywhere, and that white people are racist simply by being white, and that people who are not white, the polite word is person of color for a non-white person, are oppressed and are victims and marginalized. And so it essentially is just saying that, and there's nothing you can do about these things. Your skin tone is your fate, in essence. And so I feel very uncomfortable at Smith College for a number of reasons, talking about my race at work. So I made that known in one of these discussions that was mandated. And I said, I don't feel comfortable discussing my race at work. I'm going to pass. And I was essentially shamed for doing that. I was told that any white person who does not discuss their race when asked to is exhibiting white fragility, and as such is committing a power play. So that was really the line for me, this was not about stifling my speech. This was about seeking to compel me to speak, and using shame, because that's what happened, and as a public shaming, as a tool to compel me to recite a script based upon my race. And so I filed a complaint with the college. The complaint was pending, and then George Floyd was murdered. ALN became very active, and in the middle of a pandemic in which many staff were facing furloughs in the fall, as the college was not going to be open, the college released a 4-page document with even more trainings and committees and councils and dialogues and discussions. And so at that point, I realized the college is not, I have a complaint pending. They're not taking this seriously. And I decided to wage an optical campaign, because I know optics are very important to Smith College. So I made a video, and that's how I met you, Obey. On Twitter.
Well, I also saw your interview with Benjamin Boyce. You were talking about this, they're making you go to these mandated meetings. I don't want to say what the meetings are like, because I wasn't there, obviously. My reading of some of this stuff, especially something like white fragility, it's not enough that they compel you to speak or they compel you to silence it. Be quiet, sit down, speak when spoken to, and say what you're told to say. It's a mixture of both. It's be quiet when we tell you, and when we allow you permission to speak, you can only say these things.
Yes, exactly. It's a script.
Yeah, it's all performative.
Performative, yeah. And even that's just uncomfortable. Anything performative is uncomfortable, right? Like, hey, we're going to have an authentic discussion about our feelings, or whatever the topic is. But it's performative, it doesn't feel comfortable. And then you add something like race to it, something that's charged as race. Less comfortable.
Okay, now I don't know what went on at Smith, but some of the stuff I'd seen from, I think his name is Christopher Rufo. He was posting out a lot of the stuff that was being done at the federal level, and also in Seattle. They would divide the employees up. So white employees went into one room, employees of color went into another room. This is in the name of anti-racism. Was stuff like that done in your meetings, or was it just all one big group, or how did that work?
Not in this meeting, but shortly after that, over the summer, my supervisor sent an email out to just the white people in my department. So the beginning of that, just the white people, so that we can talk about how we can better support the brown people in the department. And so that was a little alarming. And then we also have We have affinity houses on campus, which I don't know. I feel like that's a little different. That's optional. Um, where you get into problems is when you have beds, for example, available in the affinity houses and not enough beds elsewhere on campus, and so you're housing white students in temporary spaces like living rooms and stuff, because you say you don't have enough beds, because you cannot put a white student into the black affinity house, for example.
But the affinity houses, like, how do you do that? Because I mean, I saw at NYU they wanted to make some dorms segregated, but the
Yeah, it's a state. Well, you can't legally,
yeah,
right? Because so I talked to my supervisor about that because we had this issue where we had beds available in the Affinity House, but we did not have enough beds for students elsewhere. And so I thought, well, can we put these students in the Affinity House? Well, no, we can't do it. They're white, you know. And so I said, well, can white people apply? Because people apply
hmm
to be in the Affinity House. They have to explain why they want to be in the Affinity House. And I said, well, can white people apply? And she said, yes, but white people would have to explain why they would want to live in an affinity house with quote black identified students. So obviously the application process is going to be different
yeah,
for a white person than for a black person, and and legally they can't really keep out a white person, so they're relying on white guilt. White guilt is the glue. They're relying on students to not apply.
yeah,
They're just hoping
yeah.
that they won't,
But
and they don't apply.
okay, but I got one question there. Black identifying students? I mean,
Yep.
is this the thing of like if you don't vote Biden, you ain't black? I mean, like, what do you mean by black identifying? Like,
What does that mean? I does that Rachel
Rachel,
Dolezal?
yeah, exactly. Or what was that? That there was a few others. There was about 5 or 6 now. There was like
I guess it's okay. Is there 5 or
there were
6?
there was about okay. There was at least another 3 or 4 this year. I think there was 4, so I think that brings up to 5, where there were professors and stuff. One of them was, I think she was a Jewish woman from Queens who said she was black, and there's a video of her talking about uh people, black people who joined the police, and she's like, snitches get stitches, and basically calling them race traitors. And she was a professor, and she got caught out as lying of being black.
I guess she didn't say I'm black identified. Maybe that would have been.
But there was like I said, a few others that came out like this, where they were pretending they were white and they were pretending to be another race. So when you say black identify, like,
It's almost inviting that kind of thing,
what?
right? But I guess for black people to say they're black
And again, it
identified,
should,
but
like, this was not even, this is not a university, but Barry Weiss and Thomas Chatterton Williams were on Bill Maher. This is a couple of months back. Thomas Chatterton Williams is, I think his mother was white. So, he's mixed race. And there was a comment, saying, oh, two non-people of color are discussing black issues. And it's like, okay, well, he grew up in the States. His father was black. you know, he's got black family. I mean, he looks, he looks as black as Obama did. And but no, he's not a black person. Like,
I think that's what it's like. People who are mixed race, like where you want to identify.
I went to university. You have the Muslim Students Association, the Jewish Students Association. You have all these different, and fine, I get that. There was, especially in Montreal, there was like, a large segment of Caribbean students. So you had a Caribbean Student Association. I get that. But like an affinity house or a dorm room, that is where, okay, you're crossing over a line now. I mean, that's separate but equal type of thing.
I don't know. They're optional though, so that's different than segregation
Yeah,
where
yeah.
like
Okay, no, I get that. It's not segregation. It's same thing at Harvard.
yeah.
I think it was last year. Last year, I believe there was. I'm gonna get this number wrong because I was looking at some of the things, but there were something like 75 colleges with segregated graduations, and some of them were purely segregated graduations, and others at like Harvard they had a regular graduation, then they had a separate graduation, like a ceremonial thing for students of color.
So were the students of color in the first graduation, and then
Everyone was in the first, and they had a separate second one for them. Some places it was actually two separate graduations.
so some places that like people? Wow, I think I heard about this, but I'm like didn't really connect with it. I'm just trying to imagine that in my head, like having a graduation. It reminds me of was it basketball where they had two national anthems?
Oh, they did they started that at the NFL this year. The Black National Anthem, but you see, like that doesn't bother me. Okay, the national anthem thing, yeah, because that's been around for a while. It wasn't just something they thought up, right? Like they actually have that song has been around for a while and stuff like that. Kaepernick taking a knee doesn't even really bother me. Like the flag and all that's there. Everything that symbolizes his right to protest is in with that flag. Now, if he signed a specific contract with the NFL, that's a contractual obligation. I don't even want to get into that. Like that's, but as far as like if you're talking about liberty and rights, so I don't really see a problem with the Black National Anthem per se. Like if it was, you know, they decided to write something on the spot and say, well, we have to sing this now, that's a different story. But just singing that, like something that's been, and again, I think that goes to part of education. Like you're not, if people aren't aware that existed, maybe if people were more aware of it and why it was there, that could be part of like history education. And I don't mean Black history. Like I don't think they should have that. I think they should just have history. And when you're discussing, you know, the the colonial period between the Revolutionary War and Civil War, like talk about Frederick Douglass, talk about.
No, I was just thinking about what you're saying. So you're saying like because that's just part of history, right? Harry is part of our.
George Washington Carver, everyone talk about Harriet Tubman in the times when they were alive. So, because I don't have an issue with that. Sorry, I rant a bit. Getting off that, getting back to. Yeah, that's part of your history. I mean, the song was around for a while. It wasn't just like the song just came up and they said sing this now. Like if you go back and again I'm doing it I'm not doing it justice because I don't have any information in front of me. And because when I heard about it, I just looked it up, and okay, it goes back a little bit, and they'd had this around for a while, so it's not like it was a new thing. So I'm like, why not have it? It's not, you're standing for the national anthem. You can stand a little bit longer. It's not a big deal, or sit or do whatever you want. Part of the country. I mean, are people going to complain if they say, if they sing "God Save America" or Star Spangled Banner"? Both. I guess technically Star Spangled Banner is the national anthem, but would someone really freak out if they sang "God Save America" or "God Bless America"? Like, but yeah, I just want to get back to Smith. I know what you're saying about the Affinity House and stuff, but have you looked into, or do you know if anyone's looked into, like the language that came with that thing? Is it similar to the language used in your diversity trainings and things like that?
I don't know. I haven't looked at it that closely. I know that the affinity houses were very kind of rushed because, as I was mentioning before, in the lower volume portion, July 31st, 2018, the student involved with that made some demands, I think on her Facebook page or maybe a newspaper, and that's why I'm able to talk about it. Because she made public that she wanted Smith, in addition to a number of other demands, she wanted affinity housing at Smith. And my opinion is that that is why suddenly we had affinity housing. In fact, the college, it was quite a rushed endeavor. So I don't remember. No, it's probably, I think there's something on the website that just says the affinity house. I mean, you can look it up. It just says the affinity houses are open, are for intended for some kind of community for Black identified students. And then there's one for students of color, which I guess also would encompass Black identified students technically. And then I believe there's a clause that says they are open to everyone as per law or something like that. But it doesn't specify. It's a little bit opaque. Like it doesn't have the application process on the website. So I don't know that a white student would ever challenge it.
Like if I hear Affinity House again, if I'm not at Smith, but I live in the town around it or whatever, and I just hear they're starting an Affinity House for Black students. Again, I would think that would be something like I said, like the Jewish Students Association. If I didn't know that was like, okay, this is a dorm room. They have beds in here. People can go sleep. Like it's actual like living quarters. That would be different than just a club type of thing.
Yeah, it is different. And I remember talking to a student of color, in fact, about the affinity houses before they opened. And she was a recent graduate, and her contention was she felt like, maybe rightfully predicted, that once you start breaking down people into groups in this way, like having an affinity house for Black students only, then within that group, it's this in-group, out-group thing that happens. Like maybe it's human, I don't know, where students start almost like a competition. I don't know, that's not the right word, but like who's blacker, like and then also issues of like, well, your mother is white, so you're not as Black as I am, and maybe, oh, your boyfriend's white, so he can't come in here and spend the night in here. And then you have issues with staff too, where staff have legitimate concerns given Smith's history with students accusing staff of racially motivated behavior. You have a very white staff who are also amongst the lowest paid on campus, who are going in to clean this house, and service it, facilities people who have some fear, that maybe they're not welcome here. And maybe they're not welcome, but houses do need to get cleaned and things do break. And so I can empathize with the concern of those staff, because we've seen what happens when a staff member is accused, that the college will maintain that it was a racially motivated incident, even if it is later found not to be. So there's that. I mean, there's all kinds of concerns. There's this in-group, out-group thing, and then this having white staff work in these houses. Like, is that okay? I don't know. Maybe it's not okay. So like in principle, I'm not really, I mean, look, Smith is a women's college, right? Or as some would say, historically women's college. It's technically officially a women's college. In a sense, we're already excluding men, right? So I'm not against it in principle. So I'm not going to say like I'm against affinity housing. But then they also have the issue of affinity too. Like when I think of affinity, the fact that we've conflated this to mean immutable characteristics, as if we share a skin color, we automatically have so much in common, or we share a culture. And that's like, I don't assume that. And so I don't like this conflation of the word affinity with like race, and that's kind of like the Biden thing, right? If you ain't Black, it's like that all Black people vote Democrat or something, when that's just not true. Like, so I have the problem with the affinity, and we have affinity groups for staff too. And I was really troubled by that, because it wasn't like Black knitters or Asian, I don't know, Asian watercolor painters. It was like just Asians, Blacks. um it was like you have an affinity by sharing a skin color. That no whole notion concept is really troubling, I think.
The statement that I think it was your school, the president that put out from Smith, and the language again, it's all about unity and inclusiveness and this. And like if you take a look at the motto of the United States, e pluribus unum, out of many one. This is the exact opposite. It's out of one many. So you have the Smith College community, and then you're just splintering that down. I mean, yes, like you mentioned, people will do it anyways. You have cliques in high school, you'll have cliques in each classroom, you'll have all that. To actually break it down by, out of curiosity, like, because I mean, we had spoken before, but there was a problem with the audio. But I'd mentioned like Benjamin Boyce's series on Evergreen, and it talks about the he shows the buildup that led to that confrontation with Brett Weinstein in front of his classroom. And then everything afterwards with, where Bridges is putting his hands down and all that stuff. Like, did you notice like a build up to what had happened in 2018? And how are you, like, once this stuff started coming in, are you seeing relations getting better? Are things getting tenser? Like, how's that going on there?
Oh, that's the whole point. I think things are definitely not getting better. It's like the complete opposite. I mean, to me, it didn't seem like it was hard to logically predict that racial tensions would be increased by constantly focusing on race. But I guess Smith doesn't feel that way. And I think what happened on July 31st, 2018, I wasn't only at the college for a year before that. I think that was really a turning point only in terms of, I think the faculty and the students were talking a lot about race and talking about whiteness using this kind of language that we're talking about. But I feel like it really started to affect staff more when the college kind of turned it onto staff and said, okay, staff, now you've been accused. And so now you need to be involved in these conversations too. And so then that, now we're including staff in our quote community umbrella. Like, you can no longer just come to work and go home because you're white and you need to participate in this and be held accountable and so on and so forth. If anything, I see that incident as a buildup to what's going on now with me. But maybe it's because I keep bringing that incident up. I don't know. But I think Benjamin Boyce, I think this is like kind of a common notion, right? That if you do this, it makes it becomes like a pressure cooker, right? And then something happens that maybe is benign, even if it was in a vacuum, but against the context of this highly hyper racialized community, it just explodes.
The more I read of it, there's no way anything based on this ends well. Like you said, it's hyper focused on race, and at the same time, it's focusing on who's oppressed whom. It separates people. Then you'd mentioned, okay, in one of those affinity houses, people are going to start breaking apart anyways. I mean, you have that in the United States now. You have like the thing like the ADOS, American Africans descendant of slaves. So there's a thing, okay, they get reparations, no other Black Americans get reparations, which I can have an understanding for. But then part and parcel with that comes along that anyone who comes here as an immigrant, so it doesn't matter that you could be, your family had escaped the genocide in Rwanda. No, you don't know what it means to be oppressed, and you're not you don't have the Black American experience. So you are actually an immigrant, and you're part of the colonizer, and you're helping to colonize over the Black people who are descendants of slaves. One other thing, that this is a very, very small segment that says this. It's not like very pervasive, but it's still there, and it's in the literature. Slaves that were brought over to the United States, because their labor helped the colonizers, and the white colonizers killed off the indigenous people, slaves are responsible for the indigenous genocide. Wrap your head around that.
This is in the literature somewhere.
It was a paper written about this, and it's like post-colonial stuff, and it also comes out of like the term like BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Black and Indigenous people were more oppressed than people of color, other people of color. So now you're ranking everything out, and so now here the Indigenous people were wiped out, and so they suffered more than the Black people, even the slaves. And like I said, it's very, very ludicrous logic, and
That's a perfect example of what happens when we do this and we start drilling down and making finer and finer distinctions.
There's one thing, because you'd mentioned it before, like the university gone into furlough, and then you're adding all these diversity courses. I saw the salary. I don't know if it was your president or if it was like one of these diversity people. It was like $6.
Yeah, that's the president.
There was one recently. It was, I want to say somewhere in Michigan. I don't have it in front of me. So dean or the vice president, and you're also the diversity officer. $315,000 a year, $700 or $750 a month car allowance, and a $25,000 signing bonus.
I think I saw that.
Okay, now all this talk about the student loan, I can understand. I had friends who took out went a huge debt for school. Part of the problem with student loan is this bloat. Do you see that at Smith or, well, no, I mean, like, I can't remember. I think it was Yale where at one point I think they said they had more administrators than they had other staff.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's, yeah, bloat is a good word, I guess. I mean, these people are getting paid a lot of money. And as somebody pointed out to me with the video that I made and subsequent videos about the college, attempting to distance itself from me as much as possible, that it's not, she was speculating that it might not necessarily be so much about an ideology, like, oh, well, she doesn't share our ideology, as it is about their jobs. So I've been thinking about that a lot lately. I mean, these are very lucrative positions, and they come with a lot of other benefits, I believe, Smith. Yes, I think there's bloat. And I think that when you have that, people, there's a lot to lose is what I'm saying. And so any threat or perceived threat, I think the heels are going to dig in. It's not going to be like here I am trying to have a conversation when really, like, there are people who are just trying to, like, keep their jobs. Like, they see me as a potential threat. I mean, I don't know. I'm just speculating. A friend of mine was speculating on that, and it made me personalize it and humanize it a lot, in a way, a lot more for me.
Oh no, I see it, but at the same point too, let's take this person $315,000 a year. Oh, we're doing so much for diversity. We're doing so much for the underprivileged. If you took that $315,000 and you invested it in, I don't know, more subsidized meals for low-income students, I don't understand like that. That's where it gets me. Like spoken to this teacher out of Texas, and she started this thing called Clear the List. Basically, teachers make wish lists, and the teachers makes wish lists, and people can go buy them stuff. And it's, this is for elementary schools and high schools. And I mean, some of the things I see on there, they're, I think they call them Title I schools. So they're in underprivileged neighborhoods and, like lower income neighborhoods and stuff. Teachers are asking for pencil sharpeners. If the school's hiring administrators, diversity administrators, and this and that for that kind of money, but they can't put pencil sharpeners in their classrooms, there's a problem. And I think that's part of the issue with universities as well. Harvard's like 50, 60 grand a year.
Why do you think that is? Like, how does it happen, this kind of thing? Why?
Create a problem, you say that things are wrong, and I'll show you how to fix it. Okay, if you want my tinfoil hat theory on this, is this stuff came out, critical race theory came out of critical legal theory at Harvard Law, and they were looking at some serious issues. And Derek Bell, when he wrote a couple of things, he made some good points. Like he said that with Brown versus the Board of Education, what they should have done was desegregated education, not necessarily the schools. That makes sense to me. But then he goes on to say that they should have kept segregation, they should have kept everything apart, blah, blah, blah. But when it mixed with intersectionality in the 90s, and then you had a lot of this other stuff coming out. I mean, there was a lot of background into the first people who had this latest iteration of critical race theory intersectionality degrees came out in the late 90s. Like I'm talking about like doctorates, like graduate and doctorate level. They start going into media, they start going into government, they start coming back into university because 2001, 9/11 happens. Bush, the whole Islamophobia thing. You're racist if you're a patriot. I mean, after like the first 6 months, all this stuff. So Bush's like, okay, we'll push back on racism and Islamophobia. So they go get a PhD in sociology or a PhD in African studies or something. But okay, I've focused on race. This is what they were taught. This is what they're using. This is how they're taught to think. And it just slowly builds up until about 2010 when it starts getting into high schools and later into middle schools. And it's just the colleges of education have been taken over since about the 80s. Yeah, like I said, I'm tinfoil hat conspiracy theory here, but you can see it kind of. So that's where it comes from. And these people need victims. Like you said, this thing says, how did racism take place? So racism manifests itself in every two people. You could be walking down the road and there's a black person walking in the opposite direction, right? So you're both on the sidewalk. You're going east, they're going west. Your paths cross, you both smile and nod, and you keep going. You smiled and nodded because you're white and you know that you're more privileged and you're better place, and they have to show you that obedience. The black person smiled and nodded because they just want to get by and they don't want to be attacked, and there's racism in that. That's how this stuff looks at everything. So they're going to find problems everywhere, and they need the victimhood to earn a paycheck. Kendi getting $10 million from Twitter and then $20,000 a pop to speak. It's a nice way to make a living.
I think about Robin DiAngelo a lot, like how brilliantly she exploited white guilt, twisted the knife of white guilt, and then
look up Saira Rao.
who?
She's like Saira Rao. I think it's SAIRO Rao, RAO. She She gets white women to read White Fragility, and then you can invite her over to your place with I think like up to like 4 of your friends, and it's $2,500 a pop. Where she comes over to your house, you make her dinner or you feed her dinner, and then you discuss white fragility, and she sits there and tells you how awful you are for being white women, and people pay her for this.
Like a paid exorcism or something. It's like,
Oh God, yeah, it's $2,500 a pop.
well, I mean, that's worth it, right? It makes you feel better. Like you've done, like you're less racist than other white people because you've had this blessing or exorcism done to you by this person.
But yeah,
It's brilliant, I have to say.
oh whatever. Maybe if things don't work out at Smith, you got a career change. In the college, like you're completely alone. Do you have
I
some
feel
support, or
like
like how's that?
we are establishing some back channels, yes. Some of my colleagues, most of the colleagues with whom I spoke about this topic before the video, I have not really spoken to since the video. They kind of disappeared, and I understand that, they don't want to be associated with me. It's a little too close to home, and there's just such extreme fear associated with this. But other people have reached out to me that I did not know before, and I'm very happy about that. And I'm focused on that because that's that's the purpose of the video, really. I mean, if I want to improve working conditions, I need to work in concert with other staff and faculty. And so I'm happy about that. I can't say it's been an avalanche of support from Smith. But I will say there's been an avalanche of support from people elsewhere. And I think that's because it feels safer to them to reach out to somebody from another institution. Like, let's say somebody from Wellesley, I think if they feel okay reaching out to me at Smith, but maybe they wouldn't feel as safe reaching out to somebody like a colleague at Wellesley who had done the same thing. There's just some distance there. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But I do feel very alone in many ways. I've been exiled, but to be honest, I really felt that way for a while now. There's something really tragic about walking around and feeling like something's wrong and you're not totally on board with this mandated ideology, and feeling like maybe people will find out that I'm not totally on board with this, and that this worry that's associated with that, and then this impulse to kind of dive in and dig in even more to prove that you're on board, because now you're worried that people might find out that you're not, like, to this compensation. And to me, I feel like that's a very special kind of psychic damage that you're doing to yourself when you're just lying to that extent. And
Look, you should look into people from fundamentalist faith. So like there's videos like afterwards if you want, like videos from ex-Muslims. Then you can also look at like Orthodox and Hasidic Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses. So when you're listening to, and I mean I did a little video like this a while ago, and it's just, for the 5 or 6 years where I stopped believing, but I didn't tell my folks, because I mean there is such a stigma attached to apostasy in Islam. I mean, the punishment is death. There's 13 countries that will kill you for that. So it's so you're living a complete lie, and like you said, you're being forced to do this stuff that you don't believe, or you're forced to just at least nod along. It's
no, it's
it's
like
a horrible,
beyond
horrible
horrible. I mean,
feeling.
it almost makes
it's
you
not
get
good
like,
at all.
I feel like it's crazy making, like, I started to feel this paranoia creeping in, like people might be able to read my thoughts or something. And I am not, um, I, to me, I was like, okay, this is a sign that something is really not right. The fact that I'm thinking this way and feeling this way.
Yeah, no, it's not good. What about the town? Like I know you'd mentioned this before. Just cover that. Like the town. You're saying they don't really know much about what happened except the official statement, but like again, I still don't get that. Like if the university puts out a statement saying there was no evidence of racial any kind of racial impropriety or whatever, or racism in this incident, but it was still racial. Like, I don't understand how they can, like, how do people buy that? Like, it's,
I think because they, part of this is like the left right thing too. It's like people are so afraid. I mean, people on the left, where I position myself, um, as a liberal or classic liberal, are so afraid of being associated with the right or being perceived as being on the right by other people on the left, that anything, it's almost like anything that comes from the left is automatically just good. And there's no, if you examine it or question it, well, guess what? Now people are going to say, well, you're extreme right wing or whatever. And the fear, I think that causes people to just kind of go along with things and they don't question it, because even questioning it, like I said, even in your mind is like a scary prospect to think, oh my God, what if I'm a right-wing white supremacist? Oh my God. And so I think that's like really unhealthy. And also the town, when the July 31st, 2018 happened, that one of the staff members wrote, of course, the Gazette covered the students. I believe the Gazette covered it as a racial incident or racially motivated incident. And one of the staff members wrote an open letter to Smith College saying, how you handled this was wrong. And you've now created an environment of real hostility for staff. And now staff are definitely not going to, talk to students. They won't do anything. They won't call campus police and they won't talk to the student. They'll just ignore it, which that leads into all other kinds of problems potentially. And the college did not acknowledge her letter, and the local newspaper and I'm going to say their name, Hampshire Gazette, you guys need to get your act together. You wouldn't publish her letter. This is like a big deal that a staff member is making these kinds of statements and you refuse to publish it. And that just goes to show the power that Smith College has in this little teensy tiny town. It's a huge employer. It's a huge driver of the local economy. So even the local newspaper, that was a fear-based decision not to publish that letter. Of course, later they did cover it because the letter got a little traction. They didn't reprint the letter, but they commented on it. To me, that's a huge failing of journalism. And so the newspaper has not gotten involved in this at all, the local newspaper. I don't even know if I think my neighbors are probably oblivious to it. Not much. And plus we're in a lockdown it's not official. People aren't hanging out and it's getting better. So yeah, I don't know what's going on out there. I will say that, like, I was thinking, oh gee, I should like go get my hair cut. And I was like, I don't know if I hope they don't recognize me. I don't know if we should keep this in here, but like, I'm just like, I do worry. I'm like, because these, one thing I want to say, I know this is changing topic, but it goes back to this left-right thing, this rigid left-right, like where we can't even examine what's coming out of the left because we're so worried we're going to be placed on the right. And to me, that's very dangerous because then anything goes. But, my message has not changed. Like nothing has changed about what I'm saying. But I went on Tucker Carlson because Tucker invited me on his show. Tucker's very much individual against the mob. I don't agree with everything Tucker says. I agree with some of the things he says. And but my message hasn't changed. And I got a lot of people writing to me saying, I was with you right up until you went on Tucker. And now I'm not with you anymore. And I'm like, well, nothing about me has changed or my message has. And, people saying, well, how come you didn't go on a different news outlet? It's because, well, I wasn't invited, and that should be troubling to you. Like, why am I not invited? So that's really troubling to me. That
when you mentioned, I've talked about this. So right after 9/11, 2 days afterwards, George Bush Jr. says Islam is a religion of peace. It just went on and on and on. This had nothing to do with Islam, blah, blah, blah. When people spoke, and again, it was someone like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was in the Dutch parliament. She had grown up in Somalia. She fled forced marriage. She suffered FGM. Now she's in the States and she's speaking out against, or she was in the Netherlands still, and then she's speaking out against Islam. And she wrote Infidel was her first book, or maybe it was Heretic, I can't remember. And the left-wing media wouldn't touch her, so she went on Fox, and and then when she came to the States, she got a job at a right-wing think tank. Same thing. Oh, if you speak out against Islam, it is right-wing talking point. It's either you're right-wing or you're using right-wing talking point. With this, like the critical race theory and all that stuff, I'm seeing the same thing happening. I learned about this A, from reading the stuff, but B, the people I learned about it from were, you can't call them anything but left. Watched the Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks back, or maybe 3 weeks ago now. And it was before the election, so I'm trying to remember exactly when, but wrote an article about how criticisms of critical race theory are only coming from the right. I'm like, that's bullshit. It's the exact same thing. And like one other parallel I'll make, ex-Muslim got all kinds of smears, or even Reform Muslims. Someone like Majid Nawaz, was told that he was Uncle Tom, a porch monkey. They called him a coon. They called him a house Muslim.
Like it's okay to do that, right?
Oh yeah. No, it was perfectly fine. Native informant, race traders, and then like I see people like Chloe Valdery, Thomas Chatterton Williams, I mentioned before, Camille Foster, Coleman Hughes, like Glenn Lowry, like you can just list them all off. Candace, same thing. And then the things I see for Candace, and even like some like ex-Muslim women I know who are speaking out against some of this stuff, it's same thing I saw with Muslim, ex-Muslim women or reform Muslims who were women. They would say things like, "You're just doing that for infidel cock." And now with the BLM thing or the critical race theory thing, oh, you're just doing that because you want white cock. It's the same shit. It's the same playbook.
Yeah, of course it's disgusting. Yeah, these are racial slurs.
No, but I mean, okay, like I don't like Candace Owens. I think personally, like I find her an odious person. I think she spreads a lot of garbage, but I don't want to see her get rape threats. And I think people who send her rape threats are disgusting. They're the ones who will snap their fingers and say community love. Yeah, but I mean, it's ridiculous. Okay, sorry, I know, like I said, I rant a bit, but I brought this up because I want to ask you about this.
Yeah, I mean, to call it hypocrisy is really kind.
Now, Trump did that executive order, and if you actually take your time to read that executive order, it is very well written. It doesn't mention critical race theory. It just basically says you can't have training in government offices or government contractors separate by race, sex, blah 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 blah. Like all that stuff. Like you cannot privilege one or demonize another. You can't do any of that stuff in these trainings. Which, if you read it, it's really really well written. Now there's talk of Biden scrapping, which would be a huge thing.
Not very upsetting. Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm in Canada. I'm not in the States. I got my own problems up here with this crap. Like our government's got this full board. Would you even consider speaking to other people in similar positions as yourself at different college and maybe making a coalition of some kind to, put some pressure on Biden to, keep that executive order? Because, Trump did it. It's got to be bad.
Tragic, isn't it? It almost would have been better if he didn't. I mean, it was the right thing for him to do, but
yeah, but I mean, damned if you do, damned if you don't. But if he's going to get rid of it, he has got to give a reason why. And like, why is he like the language in it is great. Like if you just bring up that language.
no, it's almost like you're for racism if you're against it. It's incredible.
Well, it's not even so much lobbying. Like start up a petition, get a bunch of people, and then
Chris Rufo, I mean, I think I've seen him on Twitter at least advocating, putting as much pressure as possible. Yeah, I would like, I don't know, I would like to do something. I mean, now you're talking about lobbying. I feel like I mean, it's open. The comments are open right now, I think, until the end of December. People can, and I was actually planning on sending some stuff in. People can comment on it now, and I don't know if Biden will look at that stuff or if he'll just throw away the whole thing. I feel like it would have an impact though, because I don't know if Biden has really even read it, right, or even understands what it is.
Biden nor Trump knows what the hell critical race theory is, knows what any of this stuff, like, and Trump obviously did not write that executive order because there's just no way that came out of Trump. Trump at least is going to put on a brave front and he's going to say stupid things like, I don't want a Trump-led patriotic school curriculum for kids. I don't want that either. But Biden is going to be like George Bridges. He's going to stand there, and when they tell him to put down his hands, he's going to put down his hands. He's going to ask permission to go pee. When they put a piece of paper in front of him and they say this is going to help you stop racism and this is a new initiative, you're probably going to read the first couple of paragraphs and read some nice words like diversity and inclusion, all this crap, and just sign it.
Yep. I don't know, Bate. I'm scared. We need more people on the left who are going to look at this stuff more critically. We can't just keep going along with stuff because it's the left, it's good. We can't. I was going to say, but really, we don't even really need the executive order. What we need is the judiciary. This needs to go through the judicial process, I think, because we already have a law. It's called the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title VII. We already have viable legal claims.
Oh no, totally. Look, the NAACP said they wanted to sue. They wanted to take the executive order to the Supreme Court. I think they were just waiting until the election happened. So, yeah. So I would love to see them take that there, because how are you going to say that, that there's anything wrong with that? And then if you start bringing, like, I'd like to see critical race theory brought up.
Well, they'd have to bring it into just equal, right? And their whole thing is equity, right?
It says it straight out. Derek Bell said it. Kimberly Crenshaw said it. What's his name? Delgado said it. Kendi says it. That the Civil Rights Act was wrong because it made being racist a bad thing, and it didn't go far enough about, like, they don't like the Civil Rights Act. Yeah. Well, no. Well, Crenshaw even said that the problem with the liberal ethic, and this was in her paper, The Mapping on Margins, like the 1 in 91. She said, like, the problem with the liberal ethic it has a focus on the individual, and you need to bring back an identity-based politics.
Well, I hope we don't lose the Civil Rights Act, because I think humanity's been around for a while. I think we've tried a lot of these other before, and it's been pretty gruesome. I think
you should listen to. It was a late. Megan Kelly does a podcast now, and she had Glenn Lowry and Coleman Hughes on, and I listened to it yesterday. And Glenn Lowry she read out a letter, then Glenn Lowry just answered it, and like his answer was great. But also, just they gave you a shout out, by the way.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. Somebody told me I have to go back and listen to the podcast now.
But yeah, no, I mean, like I said, it was you need that. I don't have a huge platform where I can try to like reach large numbers of people. I just do it one-on-one with my friends. I deal with this as if it's a religion and they're being converted to a religion. I'd rather stop them from being converted because it's a lot easier than deconverting someone. Like, once someone's in a cult, it's a lot harder to get them out if you can stop them. So all I do is, like, they'll talk about white fragility, or they'll talk about white privilege, or they'll mention anti-racism, and they'll use some of these words, and I explain what they mean, and I say, here's the books I read those. I point them to James Lindsay's website, their New Discourses. So just go on here, check it out. Majority of people read it, they're horrified, and they walk away.
Really?
Like, right after George Floyd happened, I saw friends of mine, I'm 51, friends who are roughly the same age as myself, making comments about white fragility. And these are people I know I'd never seen them use it once. And these are roughly the same age as me. Some of them were working in the oil fields. I'd met some of them working overseas on military bases. Like, these are not people who went through critical race theory or any of this. Send them a message and just explain some of the stuff, send them a list of things to read, and they're like, no, this is awful. Okay, there's a book called Acting. The whole prologue of the book is about how Obama acted white and why that was bad, and black people shouldn't act white. And then the rest of the book is filled with crap like that too. But I mean, it's okay. It's written by two black people. I mean,
telling black people what they should do.
The people who wrote that book have been writing K through 12 curricula for school since about 2005. So like, what the hell's going into school books? I mean, it doesn't have to be completely. It started getting overt after about 2010, but you had little ideas slipping in before, like just very, very minor things about power differentials and things like that. So you show that book to anyone, unless they're outright racist or they've drank too much of the Kool-Aid, they're not going to buy that. And that's, like, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Just show them what it is. I don't want to take light of what's happening to you or to other staff, or especially the people who got accused of racism.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do in order to put pressure on the college to improve working conditions.
That's going to be a small thing compared to what's going to happen to other students, teachers.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people don't know what this is. They're not looking at it carefully.
Again, I mentioned, we spoke about it last time, was the book Kindly Inquisitor. So Rauch says there's two kinds of authoritarian threats. There's the fundamentalist one, and he talks about the fatwa against Salman Rushdie by the Ayatollah, and then the Christian evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
But then he said there's a humanitarian threat, which was starting to happen in colleges in the early 90s. That was the political correctness thing, right? Oh, we have to stop racist talk. We have to prevent people from being racist. We have to prevent people being hurt by hearing racist things.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole idea of harm through
Language.
through words and all that was coming in. So he wrote about it, and like when you read the book, it's like, holy shit, he saw all this stuff coming. So I mean, it's been around, and you could see how it evolved, and you can see how things got worse. I mean, race relations were getting better up until about the late 90s, and that's why I used like the late 90s, early 2000s of when this stuff came into foreign policy, because things were getting better, and then they turned to shit.
What a coincidence.
No, they did. No, but like, I mean, you can kind of look at what, okay, I know correlation does not equal causation, but look when this stuff came in, look when it started going really south. Like, maybe kind of take a look. Like, I still don't understand how people can scratch their heads and go, why is white supremacy growing when you're getting kids and then college students and policymakers to focus expressly on racial identity?
Yeah. Instead they use it as a reason to dig in harder into it. It's like a self-feeding feedback loop, or whatever we would call self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Yeah, it seems obvious to you and me, but it wasn't always obvious to me, though. I was like, oh yeah, of course. I was like, I'm a liberal. I believe in this stuff, and it wasn't really. I moved up into a very white area that was like hyper racially conscious and always talking about race, that I started to think, oh, this is kind of weird. I'd moved from a major city, no majority skin color, where, and I don't know what's going on there now, but certainly there were not these kinds of conversations happening ever. And came up here to Western Massachusetts, which is very pretty white area, at least where I am, where it's just everybody's talking about this. Everybody's talking about race, talk about race. That I was like, this something
okay. I mean,
feels off
I mentioned
about
to you last time we talked. I didn't, I experienced some racism in Canada. It's not to say I didn't. Small town Quebecois can be extremely racist. Some Quebecois in Montreal can be extremely racist. Just because I'm in Quebec, there's a lot more, French Canadians. But there's a guy on the news in the late 80s, and I remember this just because it was so, like, I was with my friends, we're like, oh my God, I can't believe he said it. It was like a foreman of a city work crew, and he's on the 6 o'clock news, and they're talking about a strike or something. He's like, my men, they work hard all day long. They work like niggers. And he said that on the news, and he's like, no, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, they work like dogs. It's like, okay, like, just stop, pal. Okay, so like, don't get me wrong, like, there is racism in Canada. The majority of it that I felt was after the initial PC stuff, and then when this stuff started coming in from well-meaning left-leaning people, and it was more the bigotry of low expectations, where they didn't want, oh, you can't do this unless I help you. It's like, screw you, I grew up in this country, like, I was Canadian as anyone else, like, whatever, like, I'm doing just fine, like, it was just this attitude of, I needed help because I was brown. I don't want that. Like, I really hate that. And you get more of that. Like, I have more of a problem with that than I do with actual racism. I mean, and maybe in my case, it's because when I was about 14 or 15, I was taking transit in Montreal, and on the seat back in front of me, someone wrote white power, black caca. And the only word they spelled correctly was caca. They spelled everything else wrong. I laugh my head off. And ever since then, someone's like used a racial slur at me. Like I think back to that, I'm like, yeah, that's where you are. I'm not gonna let it bother me. Like,
yeah, for sure.
like if you so, but like this underhanded, passive aggressive stuff is just, and it is demeaning. I mean, it like you're not gonna let anyone. I see it up north. Like I worked with the Inuit, and I see it there. Like they keep telling these people they're victims, and they like all the programs, everything I saw was to tell them how they were victims, not how to get out of it. Doesn't create resilience.
Yeah, it's extremely disempowering rhetoric. Very troubling to me. I don't want to be telling students that kind of thing. I want students to feel empowered and focus on the great things that they can do and the great people that they are and their individual strengths, and focus on what they're doing right and growing and expanding their horizons. It makes me really uncomfortable to be told that I need to somehow condescend to a student because they're not white, and in the other way, to ignore a student because they're white, like ignore that well, they might have some trauma or something really serious going on, but oh, they're white, so that kind of like equals it out, like both things are really disturbing to me. And that's the message I'm getting at Smith College, that's how we treat students. We use color as some kind of way to assign status and history to people from the get-go. It's really troubling, and thank you for sharing that. I often wonder what it's like.
I joke around with my friends, like, like blah blah blah. I'll get a job before you because I'm brown, but I don't want a job because like I said, it's something you could use to joke about and stuff. But okay, I don't know if you can talk about this or not, but I just because you mentioned, I want to ask, like, are you seeing stuff coming down to you about how you should treat students, like based on their color? Like, is it official or is it just kind of encouraged?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's expected and it happens. I mean, it was even in the conclusion of my investigation. My supervisors have a legitimate reason to ask me to consider color in my ... like dealings with students or dealings with colleagues. Consider color. And that's what that means, as opposed to considering them, right? Who they are and what they actually need. And then often there are interactions in which there'll be a student conflict, and the question inevitably is asked, well, what color are the students? So when really, before we even focus on the facts of what has happened, like what are the material issues at stake here, it's like, first we have to find out what color the students are so that we can then assign them a position, I guess. And so it's not written out, but that is the expectation. And that is what I have seen. And that is what I've been told, that I need to consider color, that's a legitimate ask. And that to me feels very much like I'm being asked to be racially prejudiced. And that's what it is. That's what they're doing. And I don't want to engage in prejudice. If a student comes to me and says, hey, my skin color, whatever it is, white, brown, whatever, my skin color has had an impact on my life, and here's how, I'm all ears. Like, I want to hear it, but I'm not going to decide that for the student. I'm not going to assume that, because I don't like to make assumptions anyway, especially don't like being told I should make them based on something I can see about somebody, because I don't know that their race has had an impact on their life. I don't know how, and I don't know that it has. I mean, how could I possibly know who somebody is or what they need simply based on their skin color until they've told me, right? So that's what I'll say about that. Yeah, I won't give away any actual situations, but
Start wrapping this up. But yeah, thanks a lot for coming on. I mean, if you got anything else you want to talk about, I know you got some videos and stuff coming out. Let people know where they can get a hold of you. I'll put links to that. And
oh my God, thanks. Yeah, I am going to be making another video tomorrow.
Cool.
So appreciate that, Obaid. It was really nice to talk to you, Obaid. I want to stay in touch.
No, for sure. Do that. And again, thanks a lot for coming on, and thanks everyone for listening.